Coming in number 10 we have Shocker. I think back when this villain was created, the idea of having someone who had vibrations as their superpower would have been a little bit harder to make fun of. Now many of you probably know Shocker. He has had a few moments in the sun, popping up in video games, and he even has a moment as one of the henchmen of the Vulture. Now you think someone who is canon in the MCU wouldn't fit onto this list, but when we break him down we start to learn that Shocker isn't that shocking. It would seem that this villain has a knack for losing to Spider-Man every single time, and it's probably because his powers aren't that impressive. He can make shockwaves that blast through the air, and he can make vibration shields. Yeah, I'm not that impressed by what you have to offer. In recent years we have seen less and less of this punchline of a villain, as I think the writers have seen that his time has come and he will soon be put to bed. As a kid I always got him and Electro mixed up because I thought Shocker meant that he was electrocuting people because he was shocking them. Well, at least for the new generation you won't have those problems because this guy is going to be gone pretty soon. Coming in at number 9 we have White Rabbit. I mean, right when we start breaking down this villain you will learn why she is on this list. It's one thing to be a down and out loser who's had enough of the cruel world and now wants to dive into a world of crime because everything else has let them down. But when you come from a rich family and you turn to crime just for the sake of being angsty, then I don't really have much compassion for you, and your character isn't really relatable. The White Rabbit, also known as Lorena Dodson, built her persona off the Alice in Wonderland book. She thought that would be a cool and edgy way to get into the world of crime. I think she just indulged in too many psychedelics and maybe went off the deep end. I wouldn't be surprised if this character was inspired by the rise of LSD in the 80s when this character was birthed. In terms of powers, she has zero. All she has is a bad attitude and a general understanding of martial arts. She's not a villain that any of us are clamoring for. And coming in at number 8 we have Stegron, the Dinosaur Man. Once again, if you get to pick your powers, maybe you should shoot a little higher than being a species that already went extinct. They already lost the battle with nature. You think they will be able to take down superheroes? Stegron was originally Dr. Vincent Stegron. He was a scientist who took a liking to the serum which turned Kirk Connors into the Lizard Man, and he decided he would up the ante a little bit. He mixed the formula with dinosaur DNA and then shot it all up inside his body and turned into a dinosaur-human hybrid. He then went on to try and make an army of dinosaurs to try and take over the world, but was taken down by a force he didn't expect. It was winter. Dinosaurs are cold-blooded apparently, so when winter came around they all went to sleep, including Stegron. If you're picking your superpower you should go with something that can handle temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius. Unless you're in Florida or something. If you're down there you can build the biggest dinosaur army you want and the state would probably be fine with it. Coming in at number 7 we have Gibbon. We got back-to-back orphanage stories for you. In fact, this one sounds like a cross between Mindworm and Robin. Gibbon is basically the missing link. He has all the abilities of a chimp that are amplified way up. He's got super strength, speed, awareness, reflexes. This guy is off the charts when you're talking about his Madden stats. But because of his monkey-like ways, the kids didn't really like him in the orphanage and he was never adopted. Now this ended with him growing up and leaving like a regular dude, but now he was just a freak with no money, so he decided he could use his mutations to make some cash. And what's the best way for an oddity to make a quick buck? Well, the circus, of course. There you would think he would be among his people, but he was rejected once again, and now he turned to a life of villainy. When we first see Gibbon, he's just a dude that has some monkey skills, but in later renditions of his character, he looks like a full-on ape man. And even though he has the abilities to take down Spidey, the clashes between the two always end up with Gibbon on his butt. Coming in at number 6 we have the Answer. Now this guy is actually pretty cool. He's just used in a very lame way and his name sucks. The Answer was already a skilled assassin. He was working for the mob boss of all mob bosses, Wilson Fisk. Anyone Fisk wanted taken down, he was all over it. And part of why he was so good at his job was because the Answer, at this time he was known as Aaron Nichols, is extremely intelligent. He showcases genius level problem solving skills and he can come up with the answer to any problem. And this is all before he ever gets any sort of superpowers. There was a time in comics when the Kingpin was just handing out superpowers, but you don't give the first powers to someone you can't trust, so he of course gave his first dose of super juice to his buddy Aaron. But at first glance nothing happened, which is probably a relief and a bummer, because if you take some sort of experimental drug to give yourself powers, you want to get the superpowers but you also don't want to come out a freak. But later the Answer learns that he has one of the most powerful superpowers I have ever heard of. No matter what the situation, when he is faced with a conflict, his body will supply him with the powers to counter who or whatever he's fighting. fighting. So normally he's just a guy, but when the time calls for it, he can fly or create force fields or get super strength. But after running with Spidey that he wins, the character just kind of disappears and we don't see him that much. This guy fits on this list because of the wasted potential. Coming in at number 5, we have Kangaroo. I brought this up in the first video. If you're a villain or a hero and you're choosing your power, you don't have to pick something lame. It seems like some of these villains focus way too much on the branding of their super persona rather than the powers. With Kangaroo, it seemed that the villain was set on theming themselves after kangaroos rather than having a cool power. He has implants in his legs that allow him to jump very far, and he's also a skilled boxer. Like, not the worst combination of things, but when you're hell bent on taking out Spidey by stomping on him, you're probably going to lose a lot. There was this weird time in the 70s and 80s where Australia was this thing that the media was trying to push. It was foreign, it was interesting, no one really knew how to sell it. The closest that we got was Crocodile Dundee. But this villain seems like the big wigs at Marvel wanted to make an Australian themed villain because they thought kids would like it, rather than thinking of a good character first. Coming in at number 4, we have the Swarm. Have you guys seen that episode of South Park where they make a joke that the writers from Family Guy are just manatees in a tank and they all pull out 3 random topics to base an episode around? Well, that's what the Swarm feels like. They were like German scientists, killer bees, purple cape. This dude is lame, not only because he's a swarm of bees that is being controlled by a dead scientist's consciousness, but also because this dude gets beat by bug repellent. When him and Spidey face off, Spidey's able to beat him by spraying down his suit in bug spray, and then the swarm literally can't get close enough to fight and has to run away. If your weakness can be purchased at Home Depot, then you're a pretty lame villain if you ask me. Coming in at number 3, we have Grizzly. I like how in the Marvel universe, if you're a bear enthusiast, you'll eventually get superpowers and become one of the lamest villains that Peter Parker has to fight on a semi-regular basis. But if you're a bear enthusiast in real life, you just get eaten by bears. 2 very different outcomes. Well, Maxwell Markham was just that, a dude who loves bears, and get this, he was also a wrestler who hurt his fellow wrestlers too much, so he got kicked out of the league. We got a dude who loves bears, he used to be a wrestler. What's the third thing that's going to set this guy into the manatee formula? Oh, he was also given a bear suit that would hook him up with some superpowers. Where did he get this suit? Well, he got it from the Jackal, who's one of Spider-Man's best villains, but that dude has a lot of dud moves. I feel like the Jackal just wakes up some days and is like, what if I gave a dude a bear suit so he thought he was a real villain and then Spider-Man would have to deal with it? That would be jokes. Some of his plots sound more like pranks than actual schemes to cause mayhem.
And number 2. Morbius. We have to include Michael Morbius, the living vampire. I mean, after all, Jared Leto is set to take on the bloodthirsty mantle with a sneaky little peek at Michael Keaton's Vulture at the end of the Morbius trailer that we got earlier this awful year. A lot of people are wondering who this guy is now. Making his debut in Amazing Spider-Man 101, Michael Morbius was of course a scientist, and actually a Nobel Prize winning biochemist. Having a debilitating blood disease plus experimenting with bats to find a solution, you already know what's about to go down. The best part of his origin story is that when he meets Spider-Man for the first time, this just happens to be the time where Spider-Man is donning the 4 extra arms, and it's pretty entertaining. So Morbius, in his thirst for blood, is like, oh, that dude's got 6 arms, that's like a lot of blood. Oh boy, that would be pretty yummy. So Morbius attacks and does a pretty decent job. In comes Curtis Connors to help out. Or rather, turn into the lizard and make Spider-Man's day go from bad to worse. I'm pretty pumped to see Jared Leto take flight with Morbius. I mean, I'm also pretty sure Jared Leto's already a vampire to begin with, so I'm sure his method acting will really come in handy.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Humbug. Here's the thing, when you hear that there's a hero based off a spider, that's kinda cool, because at least spiders are scary, they make web, they do some interesting things. But when you hear there's a villain that just has a general insect theme, you can throw that one in the trash. I really couldn't dislike this villain more. For one, he should be able to beat Spider-Man because he's got a super suit that gives him skills that are on par with the web slinger. But this guy has the worst weakness of all, a love for bugs. He loves bugs so much that Spider-Man has been able to halt this guy from a life of crime by telling him he's going to smash some cockroaches. Coming in at number 10, we have Frogman. I mean, if you don't have any powers, you don't have to commit to a super lame animal. Frogman is Eugene Petilio. There was a time when he took his frog suit and he tried to take on some of the hardest hitting street level Marvel heroes. More than once did he come face to face with Spidey, and every time he was taken into the dirt almost immediately. And it's not hard to figure out why. The guy built a suit where the only power was how high he could jump. Like, if you're going to get your powers from some sort of accident or you're born with them, then you don't have a choice. You have to stick with whatever your weird power is. That's your life. But if you're building a power, then you can be whoever you want. Why would you choose frogs? There are so many other creatures you could go with. Like the Falcon. Even though he's not the coolest hero of all time, he's a million times cooler than the dude who hops around and tries to cause some havoc. On the bright side, Eugene's son eventually takes on the mantle of the frog suit and tries to be a hero, but on the downside, Eugene's son sucks at being a hero as much as his dad sucks at being a villain. So in the end, the family was doomed to be on the sidelines. I would like to see one of those what if comics where Frogman becomes the greatest hero of all time.
Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see some more, make sure you hit that like button. Number 9, the Trapster. His name is Peter Petrusky, and I can't believe how long he's been around. Marvel has him come back again and again, despite the fact that he's got no powers other than this weird paste gun. He invented a super adhesive liquid paste and loves using it for evil. He's redesigned his costume multiple times, always ridiculous and far too proud of himself, but he has definitely been around. He appears in multiple stories and has gone up against the likes of Daredevil, Fantastic Four, and of course Spider-Man, all with just a goo gun. He is hired by Red Skull at one point and even has a run-in with Ghost Rider. His paste was once confused for Spider-Man's webbing, and Trapster was furious to see Spidey getting credit in the newspaper for his crimes. Trapster is undeniably lame, but he's obviously got some fans because he's been around so long, so we'll leave him here at number 9. Lame, but not the worst.
Coming in at number 8, we have Mindworm. You know, for some of these villains, it seems that the writers went to so much work to really come up with someone who was interesting and had motivations for evil, but then they just throw them in the toilet, and that's what really happens with Mindworm. Mindworm starts off great. He has powers from birth. He's some sort of mutant kid with a huge head. Of course he's weird and kids don't like him, but at least his parents love his huge cranium. But what Mindworm doesn't know is that he's feeding off the psionic energy of his parents, draining their brain. Eventually he gets too greedy with this and he kills his own mother and father. He didn't mean to do this. He was just a young mutant kid who didn't know any better, and now he was an orphan. From there he was bullied in the orphanage and he learns how to use his powers. Eventually he grows up and is living in a New York apartment where he's feeding off all the people in the building and getting pretty strong off this. But Spider-Man moves in and he senses that someone's trying to suck out his brain energy. The two have a clash and Mindworm is killed by some gang members. Like, all of that work into building up who this guy is, and he was gone just like that. What a waste.
Number 7, Slyde. This guy was a chemical engineer who created a chemical coating that eliminated all friction between that object and surfaces. He's like the opposite of Trapster. He invented the ultimate lubricant. Then this evil tycoon buys up the company that he works for and shuts down the lab. Slyde, aka Jerome Beecher, was going to build his own company founded on the non-stick solution he invented, but no bank was willing to give him a loan. So he did what anybody would do and decides to rob the bank. He makes himself a costume out of this material and, free from the clutches of friction, is able to zip around skating on the ground up to 30 miles per hour and can't be stopped, not by people's grabbing hands or even Spider-Man's sticky webbing. Now, this isn't exactly the most lame villain, but the idea of the slippery criminal sliding all over the place just doesn't really do it for me. Where's the stakes? Spidey could just wait for this guy to slip and fall off of a cliff or into oncoming traffic, or they could just have him slip and slide right into a jail cell. I'll say one thing, the way that he zips all over the place in the comic panels looks like a lot of fun. Number 6, the Walrus. With big wet flippers and menacing tusks and the blood-curdling cries of "Arf! Arf!", it's easy to see how terrifying a walrus-based supervillain could be. This guy is not. Hubert Carpenter was created when his uncle, a janitor, tried again and again to give Hubert powers. They exhausted the names of animals he could have the proportionate strength of all the way through the alphabet till they got to the letter W. He was totally stumped and then became inspired by a poster of the Beatles and becomes the Walrus. He goes on a classic spree of mass destruction, eventually seeing Beast lecturing at a university and decides to attack him to prove that he's the greatest product of modern science. Hilariously enough, it's actually Frogman who gets the credit for taking him down later, and this really gets the blubber boiling. Spider-Man can't help laughing when he meets this guy and winds up taking him down for the second time with just a tap of his finger.
Coming in number 5, we have Typeface. You know what everyone loves? Signage! So why don't you make your persona based off that? I'm sure that will pull in a ton of people and you'll become one of the most famous supervillains of all time. No way, man, signage is super lame. Well, Typeface, also known as Gordon Thomas, didn't think so, and he had a pretty good foundation. He was a Vietnam War vet who was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, military tactics, and all sorts of weapons. He even beat Spider-Man in their first encounter. If this guy changed his theme to anything other than signage, he probably would have been pretty cool. But the reason that he did this was because when Thomas came back from war, his life fell apart and he ended up getting a job at a sign shop, and it was the only time in his life where he ever felt happy. When the place was bought out, he lost his job, and this was his inspiration to become a villain. Luckily, he eventually switched sides and becomes a hero. If you're gonna get an F on your character, you might as well be on the side of good.
Number 4, the Spot. This guy is something else. Some people think his powers are pretty cool and others hate him, but he definitely belongs on this list. Spider-Man himself bursts into tears laughing upon meeting this guy, and looking like a Dalmatian, it's pretty easy to see why. He's all white, covered in black spots that function as two-way portals. That's pretty much his main thing. He takes the spots and he chucks them around and uses them like portals like this is Looney Tunes, messing around with Spider-Man and even making him punch himself in the face. If this guy doesn't sound lame enough already, the more portals that he throws around, the less spots that he has on his body, making himself more vulnerable. He got these powers after being exposed to the spotted dimension, and the spots can even be suspended in mid-air. It's honestly a pretty cool concept, but the villain himself is just too lame to make it work for me.
And coming in number 3, we have Spidercide, like genocide but performed by a spider. Yeah, that is not the best writing I've ever heard of in my life. Spidercide was birthed out of the Clone Saga, which is considered one of the worst sagas in comic history. So any villain to come out of it is probably never going to see the light of day again unless they're used as a joke. Spidercide is a clone of Spider-Man that has the ability to regenerate from what seems to be any accident. He was convinced at first that he was the real Peter Parker, but then he found out that he was just a freak. Such is the plight of most clones. When you read his character on paper, it sounds super cool. He has the powers of Spider-Man with some of the most deadly features of the Terminator, but the character was used in such a horrible fashion that it became a laughingstock before it ever got its time to shine. Maybe in the future we'll see someone use this character to its full ability.
Number 2, Plant Man. In Strange Tales number 113 from 1963, we meet the mysterious Plant Man. This gardener turned professional criminal was born in London and orphaned at a young age. When he left the orphanage, he became lab assistant to a well-known botanist who was studying the low-level mental activity of plant life. Unfortunately, this guy fired him for focusing too much on this invention he was making and not gardening for him. One day, lightning strikes his plant ray gun that he's been working on, and it becomes imbued with the power to control and animate plant life. Ooh. So he then makes a disguise and sets out to get his revenge for being fired by framing his boss for robbery. The plant life isn't the only thing with low-level mental activity, as this guy made from leaves somehow thinks that he can take on the Human Torch. He is later quickly defeated and his ray gun is destroyed, although I'm sad to say he does appear again in 2002.
And coming at the number 1 spot, we have Big Wheel. This villain's theme is a massive wheel that he rides around and it has guns on it. Reading some of these is like watching a breakdown of a group of YouTubers trying to find out what they need to do so they can set their channel apart from everyone else. Like, maybe if I was the wheel guy, then people would like my content. Well, Big Wheel's just an ordinary guy until the Tinkerer gave him something that was probably a prank, a massive wheel that could ride around and had guns on it. You think something like that would be extremely hard to control, and you would be right. Big Big Wheel would die when he lost control of his massive wheel car thing and fell into a river and drowned. Here's a lesson for any future villain. If you want to pick a gimmick that is going to set you apart from the rest, before you make a hard decision and invest in a giant wheel that will get you killed and make you look like a fool, you should probably hire a think tank to come up with a better idea. Like I said earlier on in this list, you can pick whatever power you want when you're building it from scratch, so why go with wheels?
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have the 1000, aka Carl King. The 1000 made a brief but memorable appearance in the comics, beginning with Spider-Man Tangled Web number 1. Back in 2001. Carl's origin story is quite compelling, as he actually witnessed Peter Parker obtain his powers by being bitten by the radioactive spider. He's clearly upset and a tad jealous. The opening of the issue has him just staring out of a cafe window, just stewing in the fact that it should have been him instead of Peter Parker to get those powers, which, you know what, I understand, man. I say that every single time I watch a Marvel movie. So, making a terrifying entrance, he reveals himself as the 1000. So instead of getting the same powers as Peter, he actually turned into 1,000 spiders. No, I don't like that. I feel sick looking at this guy. The last page of his first issue really pulls you in. It's his skin suit, like it's his skin as a suit, just chilling on a coat hook, while he takes over Miss Peyton, even revealing that he ate her from the inside out. He's a bunch of spiders that take over your body. No wonder we didn't hear much about this guy. Yuck. Next, get out of here. And before we move on with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please toss us a like down below. It's a big help to us here at our secret underground bunker. Thank you so much. Okay, back to these crazy villains. And coming in at number 9, we have the Spot. Making his first appearance in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 98, the Spot isn't exactly the coolest villain per se. I mean, he doesn't throw pumpkin bombs, he's not made of 1,000 spiders, but when Jonathan Owen was exposed to the spotted dimension during an experiment, his skin became white with black spots, and those spots acting as warps in space. Honestly, this character is super unique. In his second issue, you really see what he can do. He uses these portals to punch through space and hit his victims far away. He holds these portals like frisbees, and personally, I would love to see this guy fight Doctor Strange. The whole portal versus portal action alone would be mint. And they're both doctors. So why hasn't this happened yet? I don't know. Seeing Spider-Man use his portals to hit Thanos in Infinity War makes me think if the Spot was in a Spider-Man movie, it would be just hours of that. And honestly, that would be sweet. I'm here for it. I wish I was the Spot. Scratching your back would be so much easier. Instead of reaching and like trying to like pull your shoulders out, no thank you. Much better. Coming in at number 8, we have Swarm. Oh, you thought I was done with disgusting Swarm villains. No, think again. Fritz von Meyer made his debut in Champions issue 14 back in 1977. And as you can probably guess by his name, yes, he's made of a swarm of bees. Kind of like the 1000, except somehow worse. He's also a scientist. So, for sure worse. Definitely worse. He used stolen gold to pay for all of his projects. So he's a Nazi beekeeper who steals gold. Great. You're a villain. You did it. So it's no surprise we haven't heard much about him. I mean, what a weird character. One day he found a beehive that was not like any other. So Fritz made a device that hoped would reawaken these bees, which he thought were like the end result of a mutation with a nearby fallen meteorite. The bees woke up, but then they continued to attack and kill Fritz, the beekeeper Fritz. No, not him. And then his consciousness was spread out through all of those bees, and now you have the Swarm. Literally the bee's knees. I don't care how tough you think you are, there's no chance you're going toe to toe with bees. There's no fight. If I was swinging around the city and a swarm of bees was robbing a bank, I didn't see that. I'm just gonna keep heading to Aunt May's. No worries. Headphones are going back in. Good luck. RIP, good game. And coming in at number 7, we have Mindworm. In Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 138, we were introduced to William Turner. No, not that William Turner, although I'm sure he'd be great. He's probably fine. I'm talking about the telepathic, tragic, minor Spider-Man villain, Mindworm. Born with limited telepathic powers, he was the cause of his parents' untimely death, and he suffered from it for quite a while. So he grew up in an orphanage and protected himself from bullies using his mind powers, thus donning the nickname Mindworm. He's extremely smart. He even looks smart too, with his big giant brain head. He attacked Peter once by hijacking the minds of others to do the dirty work, so people just started attacking him randomly. What I like most about this villain is he tries not to be a villain, for the most part at least. He just feels this tremendous guilt after being born this way. I mean, it's not his fault. Number 6, Red Goblin. Green Goblin plus Carnage equals holy shit. Appearing in The Amazing Spider-Man 798, Norman Osborn stole the Carnage symbiote, and then after that, it was just a nightmare. So Norman used the symbiote to eject all of the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mash, becoming the Red Goblin. Put them both together, very scary. The rare weaknesses that the symbiotes do have went away once the two had merged, right? So if you think you can use sound or fire to take this guy out, it's your funeral, no way. Green Goblin was fine with those things, so now the Carnage side of Red Goblin isn't affected either. Even the bombs that he used are like these Carnage pumpkin bombs that will like bite you. It's all fused together and it's really intimidating. I'd love to see more of the Red Goblin, let's go. And number 5, Calypso. Making her first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 209, Calypso is a voodoo priestess who also happens to be the lover of Kraven the Hunter. After gaining her powers from sacrificing her own sister, it's safe to say she took the villain route. So what started out as her being the significant other to Kraven the Hunter soon turned into Calypso taking over the mind of the Lizard and using him. Not cool. You can see this take shape beginning in the Torment 5-part storyline. And with rumors of Kraven the Hunter being casted in the next Spider-Man flick, who knows, maybe we'll get a little sneak peek at Calypso as well. Fingers crossed. Number 4, the Red Vulture. Okay, so we talked earlier about the Red Goblin, so we might as well throw another big red in the mix while we're here. The Red Vulture made his comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man issue 592, and while some may see the Vulture as Adrian Toomes, the Red Vulture is actually James Natal. So James started off working for the mob, of course, and then after the workload kept increasing and increasing, he requested some help. So his superiors figured it would be a great time to use him as his test subject to make a new super bad. Using the same technology that had created the Fly and the Scorpion, but with a little hint of, memory loss thrown in there, Spider-Man found this monstrosity during a patrol, and he saw him eating a guy. He has acid spit, so it's not too hard to eat a guy. Even Peter gets some acid in his eyes. I mean, where's an emergency eye wash station when you need it? And coming in at number 3, Carrion, aka Miles Warren, made his comic book debut back in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man issue 25. His powers are pretty amazing. I mean, I would love to see more of this guy. Everything he touches turns to dust. It turns to dust, red dust. It's very bad. He's creepy looking. I mean, he also carries this little pouch side carry bag, so he looks creepy, but he also looks like he's running errands. So, I don't know. He's taking lives, but he's also late for work. He's a weird looking guy. The initial Carrion was actually a clone of the Jackal, but the virus had made it outlive that body. So now we're left with this. Super strength, telepathy, levitation, super speed. It's pretty hard to avoid the touch of Carrion, especially when he's motoring. This villain didn't last too long back in the late 70s, but he's interesting enough to check out. So go do that.
Coming in at number 2, we have Hypno Hustler. Next, we have a villain that not only has a lame weakness, but their powers were used to such a small scale that doesn't really make any sense why this character was ever made. Hypno Hustler is Anthony Del Soen, and he has music that can take over your mind. His songs allow him to control people around him, and then they do his bidding. But the thing is, if he hears his own music, he will also become hypnotized. He can't even handle his own groovy music, which seems strange. I've never heard of a hypnotist hypnotizing themselves. But when we first see Hypno Hustler, he's shaking people down for just their pocket change at a show. I feel like this guy should have had bigger dreams. If he got one of his songs on the radio, he could have taken over the world.
And closing off the list, coming in at number 1, we have Tombstone, a notable villain in the Spider-Man PS4 storyline, and making his debut in the late 80s in Web of Spider-Man 36. Tombstone, aka Lonnie Lincoln, grew up bullied due to his physicality. He was born albino and much taller and stronger than others, so naturally he himself also became a bully too. See how it works? Don't bully people. There's an idea. Down the road, he embraced it and became one of the biggest, baddest hitmen out there, taking out the trash for Kingpin himself. Weighing in at almost 500 pounds and towering at the height of 6'7", Lonnie is strong enough to lift 6 tons. So if you're a fan of the Spider-Man game, you'll agree he's one of the hardest villains in that entire storyline, and for good reason.
You got some stones, Rick.